Could you talk about Tina Chen and how that came together and why now?
Why now, unfortunately, is because it became so newsworthy after, that former film executive producer, whose name we will not speak in this interview. We're not going to give him
Noted.
that power. After his transgressions became so public. And quite unfortunately, when you think about it, it's so sad in a way that we cared about these things when they happened to very public, women who we had grown to know through their work. And we didn't care about it in the same way when it happens to waitresses or women who work in the fields or women who are chambermaids in hotels, because it's been happening forever. So that was what drove me.
Right. And to just put a description on it, it's basically to address sexual harassment in the workplace because of a power imbalance.
To address abuses of power.
Abuses of power that
lead to sexual harassment, pay inequality, gender-based bias, all of the things. They're all abuses of power. Yeah.
So did you, how did the group come together? How did you get?
By invitation, in the sense of not a formal invitation, just kind of word of mouth, would you all like to get together? And the great thing about us getting together, and it was a few women at CAA who convened it, but it was women from all the agencies there were certainly women from other agencies as part of this. And we were just all in a big conference room together. And I remember America Ferrera read this letter. And we were like in tears as she read this letter from the campesinas, the women who work in the fields. And they were basically, it was a letter of both encouragement and condolence. We see you, we hear you, we are sorry that you have had to, like us, deal with these, and then we talked about it and we decided right then and there we were going to be about action. We were going to write them a letter back because we're polite ladies, but we were going to write a letter and it was going to be combined with action. And then we were kind of looking around for what we could do. Fortunately, a lot of people there's a silver lining in everything. And part of what has made Time's Up work so well is that so many women came to prominence in the Obama administration who now are not working in government for the most part. They're back in the private sector and they're fierce. And Tina's one of those people.
Tina Chen, yeah.
Tina Chen. And Karen Richardson. I mean, we could go on and on. There are so many people. Even my accounting supervisor was a former Obama campaign worker in the finance and administration side.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a gift that keeps giving in that sense. So we all got together and we decided, well, what can we do? Tina had been on the board of the National Women's Law Center, which for more than 40 years has been fighting the good fight on behalf of women, using the law, using volunteer lawyers and others to advance the causes of women. So they were just set up to do this. And the number one thing we kept hearing was they couldn't hire lawyers, they couldn't find lawyers, they couldn't afford lawyers, and retaliation was a big issue. And so the National Women's Law Center basically counseled us and said, you could set up a legal defense fund, right, and that would be one way to help these women, but you can't do it in any real way unless you can raise at least $10 million. And literally we're all like choking, $10 million. And then we talked about it in a room, Shonda, Carrie, I mean, there was just a group of us, and we just said, and Shonda, I think, said at one point, guys don't blink when you ask them to raise $10 million. They've raised $10 million. And just as recent as yesterday, someone said to me that they didn't like the way, a guy said they didn't like the way we'd gone about it, that it felt coercive in terms of asking them for money for the fund. I said, yeah, it doesn't feel good to be coerced by a woman, does it? But you get coerced by men all the time.
Right.
You should think long and hard about why that feels so bad. So.
Did they write a check?
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
So what are some of the other initiatives of Time's Up besides the Legal Defense Fund?
The Legal Defense Fund is our because we want to see this through. In order to really get the fund to a self-sustaining place, we think we need to raise $100 million, which means we need about $75 million more.
And that's to pay legal fees, because a lot of them pro bono lawyers doing this. Or what is the?
What we do is we match clients to lawyers, and lawyers then apply for funding. We also cover some related legal costs.
Sure.
So if you get fired from your job because you filed a lawsuit, then you're going to need some level of expenses. So it's not, everyone just says pro bono like the world is flooded with lawyers who can afford to give up all of their time and not make a living. Because, you know, and as you can imagine, the lawyers who do this are disproportionately women. So once again, we're saying to women who want to do good, you can do good, but you can't get paid for doing good. They need to be paid.
Right.
So yeah.
What about I know that you mentioned you hope that it doesn't have to come to new laws to regulate it, but is there some legislation that you
There's
are trying
actually
to get
a lot
passed?
of legislation that we're looking at. We're being very careful in the sense of there's so much legislation that has been kind of almost a reaction, that we're trying to make sure that as we support legislation and push legislators, that we're doing it in a way that is ultimately going to be for the common good. And one of them has to do with this notion of being asked at the offset of your employment to sign an agreement. They're often described as NDAs, but they're really much more than that. They're just a way of pre-negotiating a settlement with you by forcing you into arbitration on all claims, which would include sexual harassment and other claims that are related to gender disparity, and stopping that from being something that employers can do.
For people who are curious, what is the relationship between the Me Too movement and Time's Up?
Well, first of all, whenever we say Me Too, we should say Me Too Tarana Burke. We should
Who
say
originated it,
who
yes.
originated it.
Many years ago.
Many years ago, 10 years ago. And Tarana, I saw her speak over the weekend, and one of the things she said is that Me Too is really about commonality, coming together and understanding that these experiences transcend race, they transcend in many cases gender, they transcend socioeconomic status, and the more we understand how common these experiences are, the more motivated we hope all of us will be to make sure that they don't remain common experiences. So a lot of Me Too was really just understanding how deep these abuses go. And then how do we administer to the survivors? How are we there? Because, you know, we've got a lot of damaged people out there, you know, and who need help and who need support. And I think that's where kind of the Me Too movement will morph over the years, that it will be a place where victims and survivors become whole. I think I like to say survivors, not victims so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in terms of accountability, I mean, what are some practical steps that should be taken now that you think, like at agencies or studio heads, or I know one of the initiatives, I've heard it said, is gender parity by 50-50 by 2020.
Yes,
I mean, do you think
the
that's
Jill
gonna
Soloway of it all.
Yes.
You know what? It doesn't matter whether I think it's going to happen. What matters is that we all think it can happen, because it won't happen if we say it can't. And it may not happen even if we say it can, but it certainly is never going to happen if we start off from a position of it's not obtainable. Yeah, it's a lot to ask for, but it can happen. And it has to be our goal. You know, and it's not just, remember, 50-50 by 2020 doesn't mean 50% men and 50% women, okay? It includes marginalized people of all kinds. It includes people across the gender spectrum. It includes the queer community. It includes all kinds of people. So it's really about making the workforce representative of the society. It's about normalizing.
Right. I know Chris Silverman from ICM pledged that his talent agency would meet that goal.
Yeah.
What can male allies who want to aid in this cause, what can they do?
First and foremost, it's kind of like, you know how they say, I think it was a famous Booker T. Washington speech, although throw down your plowshares where you are. You know, kind of start where you are. So men are going to be in groups of men. And in groups of men, when men say things like rush to judgment, can't trust women, all the buzzwords that come out about in reaction to this. And one of my partners did this, and I was just, oh God, he broke my heart. I was so happy. He broke it with happiness. I mean, you know, I was just so filled with love for him when he told me this. He said that he had been someplace and someone had started to talk about Aziz Ansar and the dating episode that was reported. And now they're talking about dating, having a bad date, blah, 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 blah. And he said to the man, I don't think that's what it was just about. And they had a dialogue about what it might have been about. And should Aziz and this woman have communicated more clearly so both of them had the experience that they wanted to have? Mm. And he said, it was a hard conversation because it started off with, ooh, who are you, a girl? It started out in all of those different ways. And then another client said something to me that really stuck is that, and we don't think about these little things, but like, for example, and I'm sure maybe even some of the men in this room, maybe you had a sign on your door when you were a kid that said, no girls allowed, right? Why? How about no people allowed? No one can come in if they're not my friend. No one, But we see those signs and we laugh. Oh, that's so cute. It's a boys' club. But it's not so cute 25 years later when it's a boys' club.
Right.
And then we're pissed. But we said it was okay then, and we sent a message. So sometimes when we, if maybe you take down that sign and say, why can't girls come in? Oh, because I'm in charge. Okay, then no one can come in. Knock before you come in. That's okay. That's a good sign to put up. Mm. Because no girls allowed turns into no bros before hoes. Mm-hmm. It turns into a lot of different things. So I think it's about us as a culture. So when men ask me what we can do, I say talk to other men, first and foremost. Even if it makes you a little uncomfortable and even if it makes you perhaps the butt of jokes.
Right. Do you think this movement has staying power?
It's one thing I will say is when people get a taste of money and parity, it's kind of hard to ask them to step back. Mm. So for that reason alone, it might have staying power. When people get a whiff of working in a workplace where they don't have to be concerned for their safety, it's hard to ask them to go back. So I don't say that I think it has staying power because I am, some kind of a starry-eyed. I say it because when you give people rights, it's hard to take those rights back. It's hard for them to accept. Mm-hmm. I think a good example of that is everyone was kind of shocked at the big role that black women played in that recent senatorial election. Yeah. But we've always been at the forefront of leadership in civil rights and civil advocacy. And those women just simply said, nah, we're not going back to that,
Thank goodness.
Yes, thank goodness. So when you ask me that question, yes, I do think, but that's why I think so, not because I'm, just starry-eyed about it. I think so because you're talking about giving people rights that they always should have had, and once they have them, they're not going to.
Have you seen change already?
Oh, I think we've all seen change, Claire Foy got $275,000. I read the other day. I think everyone has changed. And I think there are certain kinds of behaviors that people are sensitive to now that they weren't sensitive to before. Some of them don't express it as well as they should. But someone told me something once. They said that no one in power ever gives up power willingly. So I can understand people in power who say, "Ooh, I don't want to be alone in a room with a woman." Well, come on, that's kind of a BS thing, right? Because the truth of it is, you know how to be alone in a room with your wife, with your mother, with your daughters, with your nieces. You know how to be alone in a room. So now, let's figure out how to take those kinds of societal and cultural signals and turn them into your workplace.